All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another Third Place Books virtual author event. My name is Kalani. I am the store manager of our Ravenna location, and I am so pleased to welcome you all tonight to this evening's conversation with author Melissa Guida-Richards and myself. For those of you who might not be familiar with us, Third Place Books is an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. And we sorely miss having these author events inside our comfortable bookstores. But at the same time, we are very thankful to have this virtual platform where we can connect authors and bring them into your own homes all across the world. So thank you again for tuning in and supporting independent bookstores. I will be sharing the link to where you can purchase your copy of Melissa's book over in the chat throughout the event. Please make sure to support us as an independent bookstore and make sure to support our author by buying Melissa's books. While you're over on our website, I encourage you to please take a look at our website, take a look at the event calendar. We have been hosting a lot of other great virtual author events all year. Perhaps just last week you might have seen on Jimmy Kimmel Live where Nick Offerman gave us a little shout out on the episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live right after he did an event with us. So we've been having some great events all year long. So please make sure to follow us on our social media channels and subscribe to our email newsletter. Our very next event on next Tuesday is a very fun YA panel with some of our Northwest favorites like Martha Brockenbrough, Margaret Owen, Kendara Blake, and Lish McBride, who will be discussing Martha Brockenbrough's newest book, and that's next Tuesday. We're also excited to announce a ticketed virtual author event with the one and only Brene Brown, and that is on next Thursday. There's a number of other great events that we have over the next couple of weeks before we end our year. So please, again, make sure to follow us on our social media channels for any updates at thirdplacebooks.com. We'll be starting our event here shortly. I do encourage you all to please stay active with our event by using the chat there. I encourage you to also use this Q&A function down below on the screen here to ask questions for Melissa. I will be moderating that throughout the event, so please feel free to ask some questions for us. I'm also wanting to let you know we do offer closed captioning for this event. If you are interested, you can hit the live transcript button at the bottom of your window to turn that feature on or off. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise, and if they do, we'll be doing our best to resolve them very quickly. So thank you all for your patience and understanding and for sticking with us during this virtual era of events. It is strictly because of you that this author series is possible. So tonight I am very excited to be hosting and moderating this conversation with Melissa Guida-Richards. If you are watching this event, I am assuming you realize that November is National Adoption Month. It is, of course, a very important subject for me personally as an adoptee myself. I am a Korean adoptee raised by a white mother and Native Hawaiian father. And as soon as I learned of this book that Melissa wrote, I was very excited to get my hands on a copy. As a bookseller, I certainly gravitate towards adoptee-driven narratives, and I definitely am very aware of how rare it is to have platforms like this where adoptees can share their stories and connect. And so I don't take this experience lightly at all. So I'm very excited to be part of this. Melissa, of course, is the author of What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption. Melissa is an author, adoptee, and advocate based in Pennsylvania. She was adopted in 1993 from Colombia to a family in the United States. She created the Adoptee Thoughts Instagram and podcast to help elevate adoptee voices and educate adoptive parents on the nuances and complexities of adoption. Her work has appeared in the Huffington Post, Zora, The Independent, Electric Lit, and many others. And with that, I will be turning things over to a brief message from our event's co-sponsor, the Northwest Adoption Exchange. Since 1976, the Northwest Adoption Exchange has connected youth in foster care with their potential adoptive families. So please take it away, Jess.
Thanks, Connie. Hey, everybody, I'm Jess. I am the program manager with Northwest Adoption Exchange. Like you just heard, we've been around since 1976. We do a lot in the kind of world of adoption and foster care. The most important thing we do is connect youth who want to be adopted with their future adoptive families. And in recent years, it's been so incredible to have kind of a small, but hopefully continue to uptick in adoptee memoirs and articles written by adoptees, and specifically when it comes to transracial adoption. So Northwest Adoption Exchange, we usually don't do community events like this, but as just me personally, would like to continue to build these connections and specifically to highlight the voices of folks who have been adopted, especially people like Melissa who have been transracially adopted and have written an incredible guide on how to kind of have that conversation. We hear so much from families in the Northwest, especially who are interested in adoption, and having a guide like this to point to is just an incredible resource and piece of information that even if you're not white, should probably check out if you're interested in adopting. So really, really appreciate Third Place Books for letting us kind of co-sponsor. I'll be hanging out here in the chat mostly. But we work with kids in foster care. We really care about the kind of permanency they're looking for. National Adoption Month is extremely nuanced. It is not just a celebration. It is also a time to acknowledge and reflect on some of the experiences in the past that have not been so positive and in the present. But hopefully we continue to see that change. And from Northwest Adoption Exchange, we truly believe the best way to do that is to actually listen to the voices of people who are currently experiencing or have experienced foster care or adoption in any way that has affected their lives. So as a personal reader, I have read Melissa's book. I've read Melissa's other books. I'm stoked to be here. We're very excited to be co-sponsoring this. And yeah, I'll pass it back on over.
All right, well, thank you, Jess, and thank you to everyone at the Northwest Adoption Exchange for your work. With that, I'll turn things over to Melissa for a quick little introduction here before we dive into some of our questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I'm so happy to be here with Third Place Books. To start things off, I'm just going to read the introduction from my book just to kind of guide us into everything. All right. I want to adopt a child someday to give them a better life. This is a sentiment that is often said by prospective adoptive parents to their peers, friends, and anyone who will listen. This narrative is influenced by viral videos we see online, advertisements of impoverished neighborhoods in third world countries on TV, and discussions in some churches that urge attendees to give the gift of adoption. But what exactly is adoption? When you look up the definition on the web, it says adoption typically takes place when a non-biological parent becomes the legal parent to a child. But somehow, this somewhat neutral definition has been erased in favor of an overreaching positive theme that warms the hearts of others. Often adoption is recast to represent a family, often a white couple, who is saving a child in need. In fact, over 70% of adoptive parents in the United States are white, and 84% of transracially adoptive parents in the United States are white, making transracial adoption more and more visible in today's world. At a glance, this may seem like a promising statistic because it means adoptive families are becoming more inclusive racially. After all, from the outside looking in, cute Instagram photos of white families with their happy brown or black babies holding felt letterboards can seem like the perfect solution to providing babies with homes and increasing multiculturalism in the United States. There's just a little problem. The idea that love is enough and color doesn't matter are also very prevalent. These ideas can cause adoptees to grow up in homes in which their parents ignore race and society tells them to be happy with what they've got. These views perpetuate the idea that adoptees need to be grateful no matter their circumstances. If they aren't, they are instantly viewed as the ungrateful adoptee. An ungrateful adoptee criticizes the adoption system and their adopted parents, and often portrays a more complex view of adoption than the public often accepts. When we speak out against adoption issues, we are almost automatically given the title of ungrateful because many people see our speech as a threat to finding homes for other children in need. However, our intention is often not that. Instead, we are focused on improving a flawed system that has harmed adoptees, birth moms, and even adoptive parents. And you may be wondering what this means. If there are problems within the system, does that mean that adoption is bad? Does that mean that adoption shouldn't happen? Adult adoptees, specifically those who have been adopted transracially, have started to advocate for the rights of adopted children and to bring light to the challenges of the system, even though the nuances are often difficult to discuss in quick exchanges on Twitter threads or by answering Facebook group questions. Despite the challenges, adoptees continuously try to relay their experiences publicly, online with essays, threads, memoirs, and videos about their trauma to help shape a more honest narrative. They openly discuss racial identity, finding birth families, and even racism in their own homes. However, adoptive parents and other members of society do not frequently meet these real-life stories with compassion or show interest in further discussion. These adoptees are often shut down with gaslighting, aggression, and sometimes threats. Here are just a few examples of common responses that adoptees have received. Would you rather have been aborted? You don't know what you're talking about. My friend was adopted and she's happy. Would you have rather have been left in an orphanage? You should be grateful for the life you have. Now I can go on and on. The insults and accusations that I've heard since talking about my adoption story so publicly have hit home more than once. And it's hard to hear so many people become angry with me, but now I'm kind of used to it. For the moment I found out I was adopted and tried to discuss the complicated range of emotions of my adoption experience, my feelings have often been dismissed by my parents, my friends, and even some other adoptees. My parents asked me, would you have rather we left you there? What do you think your life would have been like? And as adoption stories go, mine is a tad bit more complicated than most because I'm not just a transracial adoptee. I was adopted by parents of a different race. An international adoptee. I was adopted from a different country. But I'm also a late discovery adoptee. And this means that I wasn't told that I was adopted as a child. Instead, I discovered that I was adopted when I was an adult. I was 19 years old, and it completely changed my life. I faced identity problems and felt completely isolated. And due to my adoptive family's multicultural roots, they were able to claim that my darker skin came from distant relatives. And even though I had many questions about my identity during adolescence, I was met with simple answers and no-nonsense attitudes that left me feeling like I had little room to argue. And once my adoption came to light, I had even more questions, and I struggled to find out the pieces of my identity, especially since I grew up in a family that had deep prejudices against people who are a different race and ethnicity. After a few conversations with my adoptive parents about these issues that I was experiencing as an adoptee, and even more conversations with new adoptee friends I met on Facebook groups online, I realized that my experience was not that different from my adoptee peers. A lot of us have struggled with our identities and with our mental health, and many of us have even experienced racism within our own adoptive families. And after seeing this correlation time and time again within the adoption community, I realized that the adoption narrative the world has focused on was not the same as what I and other transracial adoptees experienced. I tried discussing these issues with my parents and was met with argumentative comments and questions about why I was so angry and ungrateful. And it wasn't that I didn't love my parents or have a decent childhood. It was the fact that their frequent response of, "It could have been worse," seemed like their excuse for not dealing with the issues I did face. Which leads me to the reason why I wrote this book: to help educate adoptive parents about a more nuanced approach to transracial adoption that elevates the voices of adoptees who, in my opinion, are the experts because we have the lived experience. You may be thinking that stories like mine are few and far between, and this doesn't really happen all that much, but that's not the case. I found that many adoptees have similar stories to mine and have also struggled with their identities and how they fit in. The attacks I've seen hurled at fellow adoptees are simply telling their most heart-wrenching stories about their childhood and experience just keep coming. This experience is all too common, and not just with late discoveries like myself. It is also prevalent within transracial adoptions in general. And because of all this backlash, all these comments by adoptees and adoptive parents, I've included in this book were taken from confidential interviews. The names of interviewees have been withheld by mutual agreement to keep their privacy. And if you've done any research into adoption, you've probably found that most books, guides, movies, and even stories are told from the adoptive parent's perspective. The voices of adoptees who have experienced beauties as well as struggles from adoption are often underrepresented. But adoptees have a lot of insight and help to offer adoptive parents that will not only help the adopted child, but will also help the whole community grow and prosper. My mission is to create an open dialogue in which adoptee voices can be prioritized so that the adoption community can come together to create a beneficial change for us all. Adoptive parents are too often portrayed as the heroes in the story, set out to give a child a better life, or at least what most people think of as a better life according to modern society standards. The idea that the system is imperfect is one that goes against the very core belief that many adoptive parents hold dear. And one of the greatest fears of an adoptive parent is their child being hurt by something that they were told was beautiful and amazing by everyone they knew. How can there be flaws in the very thing that brought them what they desired most, a child? How can loving a baby be bad? How can saving a baby be bad? And when I first started talking to my adopted mother about my thoughts on adoption, she grew very angry and defensive. And yes, as an adult, I probably could have broached topics in a more sensitive manner. But initially, I was carrying a lot of pain and resentment associated with our relationship. But when I talked to her about certain issues that show up in transracial and international adoption practices, she often shut me down or hurt me with her reaction. One time she said to me, "I get it. You hate adoption. I should never have done what I did. I get it. I'm evil." And her words dripped with sarcasm, anger, resentment, and pain. And this is what made me realize that we needed a way to discuss these topics in a way that didn't threaten the idea that adoptive parents can be real parents and good parents if their children's lives aren't perfect. The reality is that no parent is perfect. We all make mistakes. And with this book, I hope to find a way to cross that bridge that is often rife with many emotions from all sides of the triad to help us all come together and to do what is best for transracially adopted children and adults. And if we can push aside pride, anger, and resentment and respect one another's truths, if we can learn and grow from actual research and lived experience of adoptees, we can help improve lives. We can help make a difference. But the only way we can do this is by coming together, by sitting with topics that make us uncomfortable, that make us defensive, sad, and sometimes angry. And to do this, we need to acknowledge why this mentality is a problem and why it happens. And then we need to explore different, realistic solutions to do away with it that are helpful for all involved in the triad. This book is a tool for those who are willing to learn more and become allies to make change to the complicated systems of adoption. In it, we will explore white privilege, the history of adoption, and how as an industry it can harm adoptees, trigger adoptive parents, and cause identity issues. My book also includes interviews with adoptive parents and adult adoptees to provide a complete picture of the experience. And as a whole, the material focused on the challenges transracial adoptees face, but it branches out a bit to explore the effects of toxic positivity in the adoption community. And although the title of this book implies that the audience is only white adoptive parents, this text should speak to all parts of the triad. At times, adoptive parents reading this material might become defensive, but as I explained earlier, this is all a natural process of coming out of the fog. I urge you to take your time, begin discussions with adult adoptees or therapists, and even write in a journal for a time before you react to this information. And if you're an adoptee, I hope that you can find some understanding of the experience that you may have gone through. And if you're a birth parent, it might influence your decision when placing your child. Adoption is a multifaceted experience for everyone involved, but we can learn from one another to help prevent trauma if we just open our hearts to the fact that all our experiences and feelings are valid.
All right, thank you, Melissa. I was just taking a look at some of the attendees here, and I see some familiar names and people I know, family and friends, customers. The whole idea of the audience was something that really kind of fascinated me. And initially I thought that'd be kind of a dumb starting question because it's in the title, what white parents want or should know. And I was really fascinated by that because the whole time I was reading it, I felt like it was such an affirmation, and everything was really, it felt so true to me. And I was just kind of curious, yeah, the overall audience, like who did you envision was your reader here for this book? Were you thinking of your own parents often, or I guess just to kind of like sum up, I think I'm really fascinated by like that moment you decided that this book had to be written.
When I came up with the idea, there were so many thoughts going through my head, and I was just trying to figure out how I could address the adoption community at large in a way that would make the most impact. And I felt in my heart that if my parents had a resource like this, that things would have been completely different. And then I realized that, well, it's not just my parents. So many adoptive parents that I was talking to and had a relationship with and would reach out to me after reading some of my essays or seeing me in the news, they would have so many questions and always go like, oh, if I only knew how to help, if I only knew what to do to help my child. And I started researching, well, is there something like that out there? And then I found this massive gap in the literature and resources available, and I decided to fill it. And I decided to do it in a way that wasn't an accusation, but more in a way of like reaching my hand out so we could all work together.
That's great. Another thing that really struck me as a great advantage of how you structured the book was that you blend a lot of your own personal story. You've got a lot of historical context just about adoption at large, and I think there's a good mix of some like personal opinion and psychology too. I felt a lot of the psychology parts were incredibly insightful, and I think you even made reference to the fact that you were in fact a psychology student before you even found out about being adopted. And I'm just kind of curious about more of that psychology background of yours and just like the research that you brought about when writing this book.
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's in psychology and criminal justice, and a lot of my coursework in college, like the introductions, we learned about schemas, and schemas are kind of like this overarching idea that you have of certain people. So if we were to say a police officer, what's that image that pops into your head? And you think someone in a uniform with a hat and, what they were like, gruff, like serious. And I took a class on multicultural counseling, and I really learned about identity and how it impacts everyone. And whether you are white, Black, Indigenous, no matter where you are, your own identity and how you process and where you are in your own way and how far you've gotten to understand your culture, it kind of affects how you've see other cultures. And so I knew from many hours of research in college that I wanted this book not only to be based on like my opinion, but based on fact and peer-reviewed research. So I did endless hours and deep dives into psychology databases where researchers looked at race and identity and self-esteem and mental health of adoptees. And I wanted to incorporate that so people would have access to this data that really impacts transracial adoptees and children of color that are growing up in white majority homes and white majority areas. And it was just kind of a natural progression of what I had learned in college and how it had affected my journey as an adoptee and how I learned to identify myself. And I looked at the racial identity model and I was able to see, well, I'm not quite there yet. Oh, I have a lot of work to do. Oh, I do have my own biases and prejudices that I have from growing up in a white family that had prejudices against people of color, and just having like open conversations with myself before I can even think about interacting with others.
I think obviously a lot of people know you from your social media platforms. Given that this week is Thanksgiving, you had such a great, insightful post yesterday when you tweeted about how Thanksgiving can bring up a lot of different emotions. And that I think you were talking about being in reunion with your birth family, and your line here I wrote down: our pain does not stop at reunion, and there's barriers every day that make relationships difficult. That's certainly something that rings really, really true to me in my own experience of becoming in reunion with my birth family. I'm just kind of curious if you can, I guess, maybe talk a little bit more about your experience of being in reunion now, and what's, you know, your kind of current thoughts are, and what emotions you're going through right now this week.
Yeah, so I was adopted from Colombia, and about 2 years ago, I actually reconnected with two half siblings that were adopted into a different family on my mother's side. And then a year later, I was able to reconnect and find my birth mother in Colombia. And since then, the relationships have been difficult, and not in the ways I would have expected, because a lot of what I knew about reunion was what I saw on TV and movies. And it was like, oh, these glorious moments where you'd run hugging one another, instant connection. And then it was like happily ever after, you know, you're back in your lives. But what I didn't realize at the time is that reunion and relationships with biological family, they're just like other relationships. They take work, and, you know, we grew up in different communities and different cultures, and we all had such heavy emotions when it came to wanting to be and reunite with one another. And the first time when I was talking to my biological siblings that were adopted into a different family, on both sides, we so desperately wanted to connect and have an instant happy relationship, but we weren't prepared to how many emotions it would bring up. And for me personally, it was very hard because I had to reconcile with the idea that other family members had each other growing up. I didn't have anybody. I was adopted with I had a sibling, but we weren't biologically related. And I was never close to my sibling. And so I desperately yearned for that connection. And then later on, when I reconnected with my birth mother, it was equally difficult, but in different ways, because there was this language barrier where I understood enough Spanish that I could understand the gist of what she was saying, but not enough that I need a translator to even be able to talk to my own mother. And that just felt so incredibly painful. And even to this day, you know, pandemic, 2 children, working, it's kind of hard to just pick up another language when you're not exposed to that every day. And so I use a lot of apps to like Google Translate to do Messenger Translate and talk to my siblings over there and my birth mother now. And so it's nice to have that as an option. And after time, like my siblings and I that were adopted into a different family have a much closer relationship because we have more equal ground on similarities. So it's easier for us, and we don't have that language barrier, which also is, easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly like my experience too. It's the communication with my birth mother in Korea. It's all been through Google Translate. And even that is just, can be somewhat nonsensical stuff. And it's been a real challenge to really like have a real genuine dialogue without that, being able to communicate in the same language. And, every few months or so, she sends me a message, like just asking if I've been able to learn Korean. And it's, and I've made some efforts here and there, but I mean, right. It's just like, we have established lives, we've got work and school and kids and so many engagements that it's been definitely a challenge. And I think you even write about that a little bit in the book, just about kind of being just like the kind of trauma of trying to learn a language that you lost at a certain point. I mean, I was adopted at 2.5 years old, and I was at that point, there's video of me running around in the adoption agency speaking Korean, and it's just like I don't know anything. I don't even know what I'm saying in those videos, and I don't know what it is in my wiring, but every time I try and sit down to study the language, it's been such a challenge. And I definitely understand that struggle.
Yeah, and then just like learning and practicing it, I feel like there's this added weight and guilt where I just feel like I should instinctually know how to pronounce things. And then I'm just so hard on myself, and it just adds a different layer. And I just feel like people don't always think of that. And so I always urge adoptive families, if you're adopting an adoptee out of a different country, make sure you learn the language and make sure the entire family does, so you can keep that alive.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest takeaways from this book that I also found so reaffirming was on the last page, you created this Bill of Rights for adoptees. Do you mind reading some of that and telling us a little bit about how you came about writing this?
Sure. Just give me a second to pull it. So I have a Bill of Rights for transracial adoptees, and in it I say, I have the right to express my feelings about adoption in any way I see fit, to identify with all of the cultures in my life, birth, and adoptive, to grow and evolve my identity over time, to not have to justify who my family is, to have access to my birth certificate, to engage and be around my birth family as long as it is safe to do so, and to refuse to engage with my birth family if I'm not ready, to have feelings towards my birth parents that make sense to me, to love my adopted parents and my birth parents, to be angry with the system of adoption. I have the right to talk about adoption without being seen as ungrateful, to share my adoption story as I see fit, not to be seen as a charity case, to love and identify with different parts of my family and culture, and to feel differently than other adoptees. And above all, for people to respect my story. And I wrote this because I feel a lot of times we talk about like what adoptive parents should and shouldn't do, and adoptees, there's this like toxic positivity in our community that kind of influences what we are allowed to say about our families, about whether or not we want to search. And I just wanted it to be a reminder to adoptees, to birth parents and adoptive parents to realize that no adopted child is alike and a carbon copy of another, and everyone's experience is going to be different, and it doesn't make it any less valid. And sometimes as an adoptee, I just need a reminder that it's okay to feel conflicted. It's okay to miss my birth mother. It's okay to love my adoptive mom and feel closer to her. And just having this reminder that it's okay, I feel like it could do wonders and kind of become like a mantra for future generations of adoptees to have that assurance.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. I absolutely love that. I feel like it needs to be like made into like a poster or something that I can just have as an easy reference. You made some reference to like viewing adoption stories in like movies and TV growing up, and I think over the past couple of years now we've actually seen some new adoptee point of views being told, particularly most recently, which you wrote about in the latest Huffington Post article, with the Colin in Black and White, and also there was earlier this year the movie Blue Bayou. Just kind of interested about your thoughts about these adoptee-driven stories that are being created now, and what more can be done. Well, I know there's some controversies with the Blue Bayou as well, and just your overall thoughts there.
I've been super excited that the adoptee narrative is getting more like airtime, and that we have these different things like Colin in Black and White. And I think that especially is so special because Colin Kaepernick is a transracial adoptee. And so in certain parts of the show, it really does reflect very similar circumstances that many transracial adoptees feel. And I think that's a great representation. And it's a great way for adoptive families to kind of open the door to more discussions. And with Blue Bayou, like I think it was super important to bring up such an important issue like adoptee citizenship, because not a lot of people know that adoptee citizenship for international adoptees is still an issue. And while I think it had all the best intentions, that I still am cautious about movies and books and just media in general that aren't adoptee led. And while they did consult with adoptees, I definitely would have felt more comfortable and be able to back it a little bit more if it was more of an adoptee centered narrative. But I am super excited because even just this National Adoption Month, there have been so many adoptee panels and so many articles and news that feature adoptee voices. And I feel like, especially in today's age where race is such a constant topic and there's so many different things going on in the news, that we're starting to value adoptee voices more. And I would love to see this trend continue.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I got one more question of my own before we move to some more audience Q&A questions. This one is a little bit more selfish. I'm very curious what kind of advice you can personally give me. I recently became a father earlier this year. I've got an 8-month-old baby at home. I know you have children. I'm curious about how do you share your personal story with your children, if you have done that yet at all, or how do you kind of get them to understand? And then I'm particularly curious too, is just because being a late discovery, and I'm sure you're much more open with your own children about that, and very much fascinated to hear your answer and any advice you can give me along those lines.
So I kind of take it in the same way I advise adoptive parents with their children, is to tell them as much information that is age appropriate. So my children, I tell them that I was adopted, and just looking at a family photo, like, this is my mom, but I also have another mom in Colombia, and I show them pictures of my sister and her children. Like, these are your cousins, and these are your biological cousins. And you also have cousins on the other side, but you're not related biologically. And I just take it little by little, and you'll be able to tell, and probably people in the audience, like, once kids get a certain age, they start to realize differences in people and objects. So they'll be able to tell, like, something is bigger, that's a bigger amount of candy, that's a smaller amount of candy. And once they're able to do that, it's the perfect kind of opportunity to be able to encourage discussion about differences in families. So my son, he's like, oh, why is daddy paler than you? Why are you brown? Why am I brown? these are the perfect opportunities to open discussions about race. And there's a great book like My Anti-Racist Baby. That's a great option to bring these conversations. And there are some books about adoption that I did write about at the end of my book. In chapter 9, I have a whole bunch of resources of like children's books and shows and stuff that you can kind of watch together and to begin these conversations. But I would say take it slow and just making it not taboo by just incorporate it in daily conversation kind of makes it a little easier. And I know it can be emotionally taxing too, because becoming a parent, and oftentimes it's our first biological relative that we meet, those connections with our children are so special, and it's nice to share them with biological relatives.
Absolutely, thank you. So our partner for this event, the Northwest Adoption Exchange, also had some excellent questions here to ask you. Diving into those now, I see we've got a couple audience Q&A questions as well, so please do send those here as we have another about 20 minutes of our event time left. So they ask, have you seen any positive examples of a really good transracial adoptee experience when it comes to the family truly immersing themselves in their adopted child's original culture or background? AKA, can it be done?
I think there's no like perfect family out there, you know, no one's going to be perfect. But I think there are definite ways that I've seen families incorporate culture and just celebrate the beauty of differences. And instead of making it like a checklist item, just like, oh, we need to talk about anti-racism at least once a month. There we go. Instead, it becomes like a daily activity. And I see that with some of the families I follow on Instagram, and they will have like weekly classes where the whole entire family is taking a language. The whole entire family is learning different recipes, and it's not just this one-off thing. It's a consistent effort where they are trying to be involved as possible. And I find it's often people in the newer generation of adoptive families that are taking advantage of all this information that is so accessible. There's so many free options with podcasts, with, you know, getting books from the library, attending webinars and stuff. And as proactive as you can be is just so special that I'm seeing now a lot with more adoptive families.
How do you think openness in adoption intersects with transracial adoption and other issues of identity as compared to how closed and secretive adoption has been for so long?
I think that as long as it's safe to do so, open adoption should be enacted. And even if, say, the birth family, you don't know who they are and it's closed in that way, there are so many other ways to be open with culture and making space for communication about birth family. And so I often urge adoptive families, especially during the holidays, to make space for adopted children and adopted teens or former foster youth to be able to talk about their family, to have a safe place where they can even write letters or share pictures, to have a certain area in the home or a box where they're keeping these items, so they know that their family is also being cherished. And it may be in a different way, may be seen as not as open as other families, but every family is different. And so making space for these little things can add up over time. And I always tell adoptive families that even if adoptions are closed right now, you never know when they are going to become open. And with technology, there's so many different things that you can do. There's Zoom, there's, you know, Google Meets, there's Messenger, even just mailing photos. There's so many different opportunities that you can take advantage of.
What if you know someone, especially a white family, who's considering adoption but hasn't thought about race, culture, or identity in a significant way? How can someone help the people in their networks who are thinking about adoption and don't regularly engage in this kind of reflection?
Well, one easy way is you can gift them a copy of my book. I also totally encourage conversations about like news stories or an essay you read. It's something I do with my mom just to kind of encourage conversations with her, is to be like, oh, did you see or hear about this adoptee and their, you know, interview on so-and-so, and send it their way, you know, open these conversations. So you're opening the door and it's not accusatory. It's more like an open conversation to have with someone. And then that can lead to even more, and just keep encouraging them.
What are some of the best practices when it comes to a white family supporting and encouraging and being part of a youth of color's empowerment around their culture, race, and identity without unintentionally appropriating?
I always encourage adoptive families who have adopted or are going to adopt transracially to make sure you have racial mirrors, and you encourage diversity, and you make sure you live in as diverse an area as you can. And whether that means you have to travel every weekend to go into a more diverse city, or you join an athletic course with karate or something like that, you're making these efforts. And it's something that you plan. So if you have adopted or going to adopt, you need to kind of think, well, who am I opening my home to? Am I going to open my doors to Black adoptees, to Asian adoptees, to Latino adoptees? And then you need to figure out, like, well, just like you would teach your child about the tooth fairy, or you know, basic rules and you know, respecting others, you need to be able to teach them about racial literacy, and be able to say, hey, my child is going to grow up one day to be a Black man, and how they are going to be perceived by police. And this is something that you need to think about as early on as possible, because you need to find proper resources to educate yourself so you can educate them, and even realize that, hey, you may not be the best person to fill this role, and you may need to get help from friends, from family members of color, and to diversify your group. Your close circle needs to reflect the environment that you'd want your child to grow up in. And I tell my friends and adoptive families that I talk to, is like, if you walked in a room and you were the only white person, how would you feel? Now think about your child going to Thanksgiving dinner and how they feel when they look around the room. Are they having racial mirrors? Are they having that in their day-to-day life? And can you provide that for them? Because for children of color, it's not just a bonus to their education, it's a necessity.
Absolutely. I think when I think about my own childhood, I'm so grateful looking back that I did grow up in the Northwest and in the Seattle area, just because, you know, there's a pretty strong Asian population, in which I often was not the only, you know, Asian American in a given classroom. And, you know, there were opportunities. I did go to a Korean culture camp. I had those opportunities there, and I feel like that was just an early implanting of that experience. It wasn't something like I really appreciated at all until really just, you know, very recently in my life. But like looking back on it, I know what a great advantage that is. And so I think like that geography of being able to immerse yourself into those areas is huge. Yeah. So let's see here. I've got a question from a viewer right now. I do encourage everyone to still ask away here. But someone wanted to, was asking about if you could expand a little bit more on the issues surrounding international adoptees and citizenship.
Yeah, so in the past few years, there was a new law that said after a certain year, adoptees who are adopted from other countries would automatically get citizenship. I don't remember the actual year off the top of my head, but I talk about it in the book. But adoptees before that era that was something that their parents would have to apply for and get citizenship. For example, myself and my brother, I was adopted in 1993. My brother was adopted in 1995 from Colombia. And we actually had to go through the citizenship process as children. And when parents adopted back then in the 90s and 80s, this wasn't something that every agency educated adoptive parents on. And so there are so many adoptees nowadays that have to fight for citizenship. And so if you look up the adoptee rights on Instagram, I tag them in my book too, the resources for that. They get into more details about the Adoptee Citizenship Act that they're trying to get passed, so all adoptees have citizenship, because there are quite a few international adoptees who have been deported from the United States back to their countries after living in the United States for 30, 40, 50 years, and they're sent back not knowing the language, with little resources, and they're in this country that they haven't been in since they were a baby or an infant, and it's something that is still an issue today.
Great, thank you. So that's all for our audience Q&A questions. I've got another question, actually a little bit more process-based of my own. Of course, it's more like the bookseller in me, the writer, editor in me as well. But notice in the acknowledgments of the book, you actually mentioned that with the work of your editor, you completely did a complete overhaul on the book. And I'm kind of curious what the early drafts look like, or what exactly was that overhaul when you were in the writing process.
So a lot of like my personal narrative that I had was just kind of like a basic introduction. And so as I went on and did more research and started to write like each chapter, my editor suggested that we incorporate it more in like a fluid way, that it was touched upon as the book goes on. And I think it definitely helped just be a little less dry and kind of get more personal about like, this is an actual lived experience. And there were certain chapters that were completely separate that she helped me see were similar, that we could connect the dots. And it just was a lot of research there. I literally had like so many research papers printed out, and I'd have to see like, well, this is about history, but this is about identity. What can go where, and how to incorporate it all so it'd kind of be seamless and wouldn't be too much. And so I tried to incorporate as much as I could do, but I think I'm very happy with the outcome that it is. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great. I guess as again, like more of a bookseller question, I'm curious about what other adoptee books maybe you were reading as part of the research, or something that you maybe used as a inspiration in the writing?
I read a lot of adoptee memoirs. So like Adoptees, All You Can Ever Know by Nicole Chung, that's one I read. And then Jenny Hae-young Wills, she wrote Older Sister, Not Necessarily Related. And it just really touched me on how like adoptees sharing our story and the impact that they can make. I did take a gander at other resources written, like I mentioned, a lot of them were written by adoptive parents, but I wasn't really happy with the information that they provided. And so I would read them and basically take notes about what I wish was in there, and figure out how I could do that in my book. And I talked with a lot of adoptees and a lot of adoptive parents and asked questions about like, what do you wish you would have known before you even considered adoption? And so I kind of just took it from there. And then day by day, it was a lot of on paper notes, and then just gathering my thoughts on the computer.
Yeah, you had some like great surveys that you incorporated in a couple chapters of the book, and that was really, really insightful too. Were there, when you were doing that portion of the book or putting those surveys out, was there anything that like really particularly struck you that maybe you didn't talk about in the book, or any answers that yeah, really took you by surprise?
I think what took me by surprise is that I didn't realize that a lot of adoptive parents had such introspection and regrets, I guess it was, to how they handled certain things. And one thing I saw a lot was just, for example, when someone would adopt a baby or an infant, and then just the openness that they had when they first adopted versus now, and them saying like, oh, I wish I didn't overshare my child's story. Like, oh, I wish I knew that it was okay not to answer these questions from strangers. And it's just like that type of thing that you don't really know to ask these questions until after the fact. And so it is really great talking to these adoptive parents who are willing to sit there and be like, hey, I didn't do this the way I wish I could have, and this is how I wish I did it differently. And I feel like that makes a huge impact on like future generations of adoptive parents who can be like, oh, okay, let me think about this. Let me ask these questions. It may seem weird, but it actually is really important.
Well, thank you for that. So it looks like we have just enough time for one last question here. Because this is our last event before the Thanksgiving holiday, I figured I'd ask the cliche question of just, what are you grateful for?
I am grateful for my two boys. I have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they were the light of my life. And just now, you know, the vaccine, so I can actually see family in person and have these magical moments where my kids get to see people like them, and, you know, incorporate all these cultures at the family table.
That's great. Yes, well, I think I'll be wrapping up this event now. I am grateful for you, Melissa, for joining us, for Jess and everyone at the Northwest Adoption Exchange for being part of this event. I want to thank all of our viewers at home watching. I do encourage you to please, again, visit thirdplacebooks.com. Make sure you buy a copy of Melissa's book. We've got plenty of copies here in store. We are happy to ship that out wherever you are, and we certainly encourage you to come visit one of our 3 store locations as well. I will be letting us end this event right now. I will, it's been so great talking with you, Melissa. Thank you so much. I will let you have the last word. Good night, everyone.
Thank you everyone for having me. And remember, the holidays are coming up, so buying a book from Third Place Books is a great option.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, well, thank you again. Good night, everyone.